Welcome to First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, the birthplace of Congregational humanism. We carry on that tradition of free thought today, dedicated to promoting a free search for truth, meaning, and justice. Our web address is firstunitarian.org. I'm David Breeden, Senior Minister. Welcome.
Welcome everyone to our weekly assembly on Sunday, January 10th, 2021. I'm the Reverend Kelly Clement, one of the assistant ministers here at FUS. In a world that is so broken, it is good to be present as a congregation. Whether this is your first visit or you've been with us for decades, we are glad you are here as a part of this gathered community. And I see from our chat that our gathered community spans local and global guests here this morning. As a part of keeping our community connected, we invite everyone to make use of the chat during assembly and to stop by our Zoom coffee hour immediately after assembly. The link to the coffee hour will be available in the chat, and it can also be found in your most recent email from FUS. Please stop by this social time for as little as long as you like and enjoy our new feature, which allows you to move among breakout rooms on your own. If you're new to FUS and or you'd like to find out a bit more about how we do things, please join our Welcome to FUS session at noon today. This link will also be in the chat. Our monthly theme for January is imagination. And as we continue to reel in the aftermath of this week's events, I share these words from American author, feminist, and knitting expert, Barbara G. Walker. Thousands of years of history have passed, and during all that time, human beings have fought, killed, plundered, and wronged each other in every possible way. Of such stuff, history is made. But also during that time, other human beings have quietly and patiently persevered in the development of the arts, crafts, inventions, ideas, and programs. From these millions of creative persons, most of them unnoticed and unknown, have come the good and lasting things in the sum of human culture. Come, let us gather in community.
Each week when we gather, we light our chalice and share one of the 7 principles of Unitarian Universalism, or one of the aspirations of our congregation. This week we light the chalice remembering the 4th principle, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning.
Now for our congregational covenant. Love is the spirit of this place, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
Good morning. I'm Allison Wyeth, Director of Religious Education for First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, and it's my pleasure to bring to you this morning our Time for All Ages. So right now, let's let our young ones gather up close and get comfortable. Okay. So when you look around at our city, our state, our country, our nation's capital, and our world, I bet you see some big problems. I, for sure, have seen some really big problems this week. Sometimes the problems might even feel too scary, or have gone on too long, or just seem too darn big to manage. And you might be tempted to just go about your business and leave it for someone else to worry about. Or perhaps you spend a lot of time worrying and stressed. But I'm going to share a story with you today that gives you another option. We'll hear a story about how some women worked together along with some helpful allies, to tackle a challenging problem of their own. So now, let's hear How the Ladies Stopped the Wind by Bruce McMillan. Going for a walk can often be difficult in Iceland. It's too windy. The ladies in one village decided they should do something about this. One solution was to lie down and let the wind blow over them. This gave them time to think of a better solution, and they did. The ladies thought, let's plant some trees. They'll grow tall and will surely stop the wind. The ladies knew the chickens would help, but they thought the sheep might be a problem. The trees arrived. The ladies planted them in the village and in the countryside too. The chickens were excited. The sheep were curious. They had never seen trees before. On calm days, the ladies and their daughters sang to the sheep. The chickens sang too. They sang, "Please, please, don't eat the trees. Please, please, don't eat the trees." The sheep had no idea what they were singing about. The ladies thought their singing was working. The sheep were eating only grass. The ladies fed the chickens leftover potatoes, and they told the chickens, "You need to help too." It was the chickens' job to make fertilizer for the trees. They did their job very well. Then the sheep discovered the tasty buds on the trees. The ladies herded them away, but the sheep always came back. The sheep ate all of the tiny trees. The ladies ordered more trees, but they wondered, what will we do about the sheep? What about the cows? They thought. The cows only eat grass. So the ladies spoke to the cows. Please herd the sheep away from the trees. Please lead them to the grass. Then the ladies built a fence around the village and sang, "Sheep, stay out. The cows are your friends. Sheep, go away. Just follow your friends." The ladies liked to sing. The new trees arrived. The ladies planted them in the countryside far beyond the village fences, and the young ladies helped. The curious sheep watched. The ladies and their young helpers walked back to town, and the sheep followed until they reached the gate. The sheep were not allowed in. Under darkening rain clouds, the ladies planted trees all around the village. Looking over the front fence, the sheep were curious, and they forgot about the trees in the countryside. When all of the trees were planted in the village, the ladies celebrated. They made food and sang some more. The sheep got tired of looking through the fence and followed the cows to the countryside pastures. The ladies' plan seemed to be working. The sheep were eating grass with the cows. The trees were growing. The chickens were fertilizing. The ladies were content. Though when the friendly cows came to visit, they didn't come alone. The sheep always followed the cows, but the fence kept them away from the trees. All was well for now. But just like babies, sheep are always hungry. They didn't leave much grass for the cows, and the cows were not happy with their friends. One day, the ladies took the children to the countryside for a picnic. The curious sheep soon arrived, but the cows were nowhere in sight. With no cows to keep the sheep away, all the trees in the countryside were soon gone. But the fences around the village kept the sheep out, and the chickens were still doing their job. Day after day, the ladies watched the trees of the village grow. They were sure they grew faster because of the singing and watching. But the young ladies knew better. It was the fertilizer that made the trees grow so fast and so tall. The young ladies always thanked the chickens for helping. Over the years, the trees grew taller and taller. The young ladies became adults, and some of them had babies of their own. On their village walks, they never had to worry about the wind. High above the trees, birds soared on the wind. Down by the trees, everybody played together and nobody blew over. Word spread. Ladies in other villages planted trees too. Everyone danced and sang, "Chickens, please help our trees. Chickens, please help our trees." It was the most popular song in all of Iceland. To this day, in the Icelandic countryside, you can still see forever. There are no trees to block the beautiful views or the strong wind. But thanks to the ladies and the chickens and cows, but not so much the sheep, there are trees in the villages to stop the wind. I love what this story shows. A community coming together to address a problem that seems impossible to solve. I love that the exact thing that they must do to muddle through and just live with the problem, lying down, gives them the time they need to let their imaginations loose and find a much better solution. I really love that they figure out how to enlist the help of allies to help the trees grow and to manage those troublesome sheep who seem to have no idea of the bigger picture and just want what they want regardless of the consequences. So, my young friends, that's not a bad recipe for solving big problems in your world. Take some time to imagine how things could be made different and better. Find your allies and rely on their unique skills. Don't give up on solving a problem, keep adjusting and adapting. Believe that together you can solve the unsolvable and figure out how to handle the sheep.
After more than a century practicing congregational humanism and bridging the gap between the religious and secular worlds, First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis is still unique in our pursuit of a community that values and promotes the open-eyed and evidence-based free exchange of often dangerous ideas. Join us as we continue the search for truth, meaning, and justice, and help keep the voice of Unitarian Universalist humanism loud and strong by considering a gift. You can find us on PayPal, the Give Plus app, or firstunitarian.org/donate. Thank you.
Hi, folks. Bob Adderhold here. I'm the current president of the FUS Foundation, and I'm here once more to introduce you to another of this year's Pearson Grant recipients and to say a few words about the Kurt Pearson Social Justice Fund. The Pearson Fund is one of 9 funds that the Foundation Board manages. Mibbs and Perry Pearson created the Pearson Fund in memory of their son Kurt, who died of AIDS at age 29. Its purpose is to provide support to nonprofit organizations doing the social justice work in our community that Kurt cared so deeply about. The Pearson Fund makes annual distributions. Since inception 30 years ago, it's grown to $93,000 and has distributed almost $50,000. Annually, FUS members nominate nonprofit organizations that then apply for a grant. A vetting team chooses from among the applicants. This year, we distributed $4,200 to 5 of the 10 nonprofit applicants. I'm happy to have with me Heather Martens, who's no stranger to most of you. Heather is representing the Walk-In Counseling Center, which is the recipient of a $1,000 Pearson grant. Heather, of course, is also an FUS member. Heather, please tell us a little bit about your role in the Walk-In Center and its mission, and also how the grant money will be used.
Well, thanks, Bob. I'm the development director at Walk-In Counseling Center, the person who works on grants and individual donations, which are what keep us going. I've seen so many worthy organizations benefit from the Kurt Pearson Awards over the years, and it's an honor to have Walk-In Counseling Center be chosen this year. Walk-In was started over 50 years ago in 1969 by a group of young psychologists who saw a desperate need for counseling services, especially among teens and young adults. The same problems existed then that exist today. A lack of access to mental health services for people who don't have insurance or can't afford their copays or deductibles, who can't wait weeks for an appointment, or who need anonymity. Walk-In provides free, anonymous, no-appointment counseling every weekday during clinic hours to anyone who comes to us. It's LGBTQ-friendly, non-judgmental, non-religious, and the counselors are all professional psychologists, social workers, or marriage and family therapists. They're all volunteers, and we're the only clinic in the world that uses this model to deliver services. When the pandemic hit this spring, we had to make a huge change. Instead of seeing anyone who came through our doors, we had to move our entire operation onto Zoom. Now people can phone in or log in to a clinic on the new platform. This was a big transition for us, but it made it possible to stay open. Now the challenge is to make sure those who need us can still find us. And this is where the Kurt Pearson grant will be so helpful. We're going to use this grant to strengthen our online presence through things like advertising, social media, and search engine optimization to go where people are more now during the pandemic, online. Word of mouth is still our biggest source of referrals, and with the help of the Kurt Pearson grant, we can amplify word of mouth, and we're so grateful for that. And one more note, you can help with this too, all of you at FUS. If you know someone who could benefit from counseling now, send them to walkin.org, and there are instructions there on how to go to a clinic if you need counseling services. Thank you so much, Bob.
Great. Well, thank you, Heather, for your work there. And I think we're all proud to be able to support the Walk-In Counseling Center. Thanks again.
Thank you.
On Sundays when we gather, we take a few minutes to reflect on the joys, sorrows, and milestones of the human experience. We do this so that we stay in touch with our own humanity. We do this to remind ourselves of the value of a moment of stillness, and we do this so that no one among us is alone, either in celebrating joy or in facing the burdens of life. This morning, after an extraordinarily difficult week for our country, we pause to reflect on the numerous individuals in our FUS community who have been touched by the death of a loved one. We think of FUS member Bill Carnes, whose mother Ruth Carnes passed away this past Wednesday at age 87 in Madison, Wisconsin, after a long struggle with dementia. She is survived by her husband Delbert, by Bill and his wife Beth Godis, as well as her 2 daughters and her beloved grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Her family will fondly remember her warmth, good humor, generosity, and her abundant chocolate chip cookies. A small family service is planned for this coming week, and we hold Bill and his family in our thoughts. We think of FUS member Caitlin Boley, whose grandfather, Alan Boley, died this past Monday in Kansas. Caitlin says she is thankful to have had her granddad live to 97 years old, and that she was able to witness some of the 71-year marriage of her grandparents. After Caitlin's parents began raising their children in the Unitarian Fellowship of Lawrence, Kansas, Alan and his wife Eleanor became Unitarian Universalists. Alan always encouraged Caitlin to question constantly. As Caitlin and her family mourn Alan's death and care for Eleanor, who is receiving hospice care, we offer our condolences and support. Also this morning, we mourn the death and celebrate the life of longtime FUS member Walter Griffin. Walter died December 29th of complications of COVID-19. He was 96 years old and is survived by his wife Carol, their 2 sons and their families, and many friends. Walter and Carol, always a delightful couple to spend time with, first became involved at FUS in the late 1940s, when they were married by newly arrived minister Carl Storm. Walter was active in leadership roles at FUS, and we are so grateful for his long commitment to the congregation and his many friendships here. His family is planning to hold the celebration of his long and wonderful life later this year. And this week we have the difficult task of saying goodbye to FUS member Barbara Blackstone, who died on Wednesday in hospice after suffering complications from a traumatic brain injury. Her daughters Lisa and Laura report that her last few days were peaceful and filled with loving messages from family and friends. Barbara was very active in many areas at FUS, including the Active Voices Social Justice Group, the Right Relations Team, the Tuesday Writing Group, and a variety of other roles over the years. FUS was deeply important to Barbara, and Barbara was beloved across FUS. An online celebration of Barbara's life will be held Saturday, January 30th at 2 p.m. Central Time. Links will be provided in upcoming emails. Memorial donations are suggested to the Minnesota Women's Press, the National Museum of Women in the Arts, and the NC Little Hospice. Links to these organizations were provided in the Friday email. If you'd like to send a card to Barbara's daughters, please contact me or FUS or the FUS office for the address. Cards to Caitlin, Bill, or Carol can be sent to their addresses listed in the FUS directory or can be sent to the FUS office. And these are not the only losses. We know there are other people in our community whose lives have been touched by death in recent weeks. If you are living with grief right now during this time of profound and prolonged isolation, please know that your ministers and fellow congregants are here for you, and that you are welcome at our grief gathering tomorrow evening. Please email me for any information about that. This is a lot of hard news coming at a very challenging and frightening time. But it is not the only news. There are still stories of joy and hope. And today we are excited to share that FUS member Kathleen Quinn became a grandmother just this morning. We join Kathleen in welcoming Allison Marie into the world and into a family of loving relationships. And we extend our warm congratulations to all for this beautiful new life among us. As we pause for a moment of silence, may we acknowledge the wide range of feelings this week. And may we find ourselves grateful for for communities that sustain us through times of upheaval, grief, loss, and renewal. Let us now share a moment of silence.
Last week, I talked about consciousness itself and how consciousness appears to arise out of combinations and recombinations of sense impressions and words and images and symbols. My claim last week was that transformation occurs personally and socially when we realize that we ourselves are capable of rearranging our consciousness through the conscious manipulation of words and images and symbols. Of course, what I didn't know last week is that we would be presented with a graphic example of how words and images and symbols can create reality. On Wednesday of last week, we watched as the U.S. Capitol building was attacked and overrun by people whose imaginations had run wild. They were not comprehending that quote that I mentioned last Sunday from the Spanish philosopher George Santayana, who said people become superstitious not because they have too much imagination, but because they are not aware that they have any. Words, symbols, images, you use them or they use you. Now, I'm not talking about the power of positive thinking or some sort of manifesting what you wish to be true. People who don't believe in COVID die of it anyway, and we've been watching the very negative consequences of that power of positive thinking since the November election. I'm thinking about understanding the power of words and images and symbols and using those in a positive way. Ways that help the greatest number of people flourish in our nation and in our world. The matrix of symbols on display during the assault on the Capitol were very much about two civil wars. The American Revolution, which was a civil war in which British subjects killed other British subjects, and the American Civil War in which U.S. citizens killed other U.S. citizens. It's easy to forget in our often rosy and rose-colored visions of history that in actual fact, the American revolutionaries were violent extremists. The British soldiers killed at that glorious Battle of Concord were real people, young men whose lives were ended violently over the clash of a set of words and images and symbols. Battles portrayed as glorious victories ignore the reality of the taking of human life. We do well to remember that Americanism, lynching, originates with the Revolutionary War officer Charles Lynch of Virginia, who made the practice a popular way of dealing with loyalists to the crown. The number murdered by Colonel Lynch and lynching in general during that war is still unknown. How many of the insurrectionists this past week realized that they were creating destruction and suffering due to their understanding of certain words and images and symbols? That flag, "Don't Tread on Me," is popular among right-wing extremists today. It's popularly called the Gadsden flag, designed by Christopher Gadsden for the Continental Marines in 1775. Gadsden used the rattlesnake on that flag because it's a poisonous native creature in what is now the United States. Gadsden's Continental Marines were sharpshooters on naval ships charged with killing commissioned officers on enemy ships. Other symbols there included Auschwitz, the Texas Revolution battle flag, "Come and Take It," and of course the ubiquitous Confederate battle flag. All symbols, all of them about violence, all of them about creating puppets on strings. And we do well to remember that when terrorists win, they become patriots. That's how words work for those who do not think about how words work. Last week, I used some of the ideas of the psychologist Carl Jung. He had this to say about words, quote, "There are hellish webs of words." But what are words? Be tentative with words. Value them well. Take safe words, words without catches. Do not spin them with one another in order that webs arise, for you are the first to be ensnared in those webs. End quote. Words matter because they create our thoughts, which create the reality we act within. And often that is a delusional reality. Let's take another example. You know, we've all heard the phrase "mom and apple pie," and it's innocuous enough. The phrase originated in the Second World War period, when journalists would ask American young people what they were fighting for. The stock answer became "mom and apple pie." Mom and apple pie are considerably more concrete answers than democracy or the American way of life. It's an answer that encompasses images of peace and domesticity and plenty. It's an attractive vision, and the returning veterans pursued that vision of domestic plenty, I'd say, with a vengeance. As it happened, the simple vision of mom and apple pie created a situation in which mom had severely restricted economic and social freedoms, and apple pie became a mass-produced commodity full of chemicals with unpronounceable names. And the vision has yet to transform all these years later. It turns out all of the warring nations in that war were fighting for some vision of mom and apple pie. But what if, rather than mom and apple pie, the answer about what we were fighting for had been, the family that can't live next door to me, or the kid next door who can't get an education? The images and the symbols we have in our consciousness create the reality that we act within. While we're on the subject of moms and how the human imagination works, consider for a moment that day we call Mother's Day. And Mother's Day exists in various countries on various calendar dates. In the US, Mother's Day began as a sort of commemoration. It was about women against war. And now it's another sort of commemoration, a celebration of motherhood itself, often of a very sentimental type in that mom and apple pie category. Mother's Day is a human imaginary construction. It exists when it does and how it does according to a set of words and images and symbols. Yet it has real effects in the world. Travel goes up, chocolate sales and phone call volumes go up, and very real people are made glad and sad by what happens on something that we call Mother's Day. We have agreed that it is a thing, and thereby we have made it a thing. But if a sufficient number of people cease to celebrate it, it would go away. It would disappear because actually it's imaginary. If you still don't believe me when I say it's all about words and symbols, reflect for a moment on the role of Twitter in U.S. government for the past 4 years. Twitter is a platform that communicates words and images and symbols, and an entire alternate reality has been created by those words and images and symbols, an alternate reality that oppresses and kills people. Webs of words arose, as Carl Jung would have phrased it, and many people were ensnared in them. Puppets on strings, as I talked about last week, people acting out of delusion and fear, which is exactly the opposite of the humanist ideal. Religion, philosophy, government, humanism teaches us that they all have one thing in common. All are products of the human mind. They are examples of human creativity, works of art and artifice. Judaism is a long poem. Lots of people have written parts of that poem. Lots of people have revised parts of that poem. Christianity is a poem. Capitalism is a poem. Democracy is a long poem. All are works of art, works of the human imagination. And there are no gods pulling any of those strings. Over time, individuals interact with these large poetic narratives by being born into them, by living in their purview, by adapting to them, or by leaving them. Because they were here when we arrived in this world, it's easy to miss the fact that they are all works of art that morph and change with the passage of time. Yes, religions and philosophies and governments are monoliths in one sense, but they are also leaves of grass, touchable, manipulable, organic, fragile. Like Mother's Day, they exist only because a certain number of people believe in them and protect them. Governments, religions, the stories of history that we tell ourselves, all those monoliths have brought the human species to the place where we are today. Those symbols of rebellion and revolution and mass murder that we saw on Wednesday create the place where Americans live today. An unjust social system, a focus on the self that not only creates extremes in wealth and narcissism, but also anxiety and stress and desperation. Mom, real moms, in her many hues, battles for the right for her own body, gets paid less than dad, can't afford health care, and can't feed her children. That apple pie is $4.99 in the frozen section, available if you can afford it and if you have a place to take it and cook it. As we saw graphically last week with events at the nation's capital, images and symbols and words create concrete actions of both cowardice and bravery. Democracy, despite all its armies and its buildings, is as made up as Mother's Day. It's a story that we tell ourselves. There's lots of ways to tell that story and lots of ways to redefine it. But humanism insists that we must tell the story in a way that leads to human flourishing, or the valuable fiction disappears. The futurist Buckminster Fuller, during his lectures, would teach people how to tie a square knot. He would stand up and go carefully through the motions, having the audience follow his lead. And then later in the lecture, he would stop and ask people if they remembered how to tie a square knot. And many did. Then Fuller would ask the audience if he had used rope for his demonstration on how to tie a knot. Many people remembered that he had indeed used a rope, but he had not. His point was that we human beings have amazing imaginations. We can clearly picture a rope when it's not even there. We can learn to tie a particular knot without ever touching a rope. The human imagination is extremely powerful. But in that very power lies our greatest danger to ourselves and to others in our society. One of the reasons that William Shakespeare's work still matters in the world today is that Shakespeare's Renaissance-inspired imagination comprehended the fact that human beings create our collective reality. Shakespeare's kings use their words to create their kingdoms in the minds of others, sometimes for good and sometimes for ill. Shakespeare shows England's Henry V conquering northern France and creating an empire through his ability to use words to inspire his army and to frighten the French. On the other hand, the pathetic Richard II loses his kingdom and his life because he is so narcissistic that he can't use his words to cast a positive vision for his subjects. And so they rebel. Yes, that's a very Renaissance idea. Shakespeare was a person of his time. But Shakespeare's assessment of human agency and human nature is baked into the humanism that flowered in the European Renaissance period. Shakespeare's vision is a way of understanding the malleability and fragility of human institutions. It's also a way toward understanding each generation's awesome responsibility to take responsibility. The great German poet Goethe said, "Few people have the imagination for reality." Now, I think that's only partially true. We all imagine a reality. Not so many of us can imagine how much of reality is only imaginary. A religion can drive people to the extremity of murder, but stop believing in that religion and its power is gone. It's like magic. And democracy is just like that. It's a thing only so long as we believe in it. And it's a positive force in the world only so long as we imagine a story in which democracy contributes to positive freedoms. Some people call Jim Crow laws freedom. Some call separate but equal freedom. Some call the attack on the Capitol freedom. The gate at Auschwitz said, "Work makes you free." We must use words carefully, and we must insist upon what they mean, lest we fall into that ensnaring web that Carl Jung warned us about. Maya Angelou once wrote, "What you're supposed to do when you don't like a thing is change it. If you can't change it, change the way you think about it. Don't complain," end quote. And I know I sound like a broken record, but the mantra of humanism is that human beings can fix human problems. That truth, believing that truth has its implications for us humanists, and it has consequences and it has responsibilities. For one thing, it also means that human beings create many of the human problems that we have to go out there and then solve. Most of us didn't much like that "Make America Great Again" slogan. We insisted that America was never great enough for enough of her citizens and her potential citizens. I hope we will all keep in mind in the next weeks that America isn't great again just because there's a different administration of the opposite political persuasion. Yes, we kept working all these past years, doing what we could to make the American story in reality live up to the fiction. Our definition of great has to do with equality and equity and striving always to make everyone free free to be themselves, and free from fear, free from the chains of poverty and necessity. We've got to use our words. Let's insist upon a communal, social truth. Let's insist upon a freedom and a democracy in which all are free and all have a choice and a voice. Will we succeed? Well, of course not. That's the beauty and the hope in understanding that words matter and that definitions can be changed. May we use our words responsibly and prophetically. And may we cast a vision that calls in rather than calls out, that imagines a democracy that means peace and justice for all. Join me from home in our Extinguishing the Chalice words. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. All of these we carry in our hearts and in our minds until we are together again. Thanks so much for joining us today, and thanks for joining us in the American dream of envisioning a new hope and a new reality for democracy. The Transcendentalist minister Theodore Parker wrote, "Be ours a religion which, like sunshine, goes everywhere. Its temple all space, its shrine the good heart, its creed all truth, its ritual works of love, its profession of faith divine living. So may it be.
Thanks for listening. You can find much more about humanism and what's happening at First Unitarian Society in Minneapolis by visiting our website at firstunitarian.org.